Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Nedling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Nedling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of our podcast is to get topics and guests that will grow you as a confident leader and take your business or your life to the next level. Today, I'm very pleased to have Tony Hardman as my guest. Let me tell you about Tony. Tony Hardman is the founder of Not Quite Zen, a blog and podcast focused on providing mental health support from a perspective of the survivor. Tony has struggled with severe depression, anxiety, and anger since he was a child, cursed with a family history of mental health issues and childhood trauma. Finding a path to calm was a journey 35 years in the making. Now he shares his experience through Not Quite Zen in hopes that he can help others learn how to get better faster. Our title for our podcast today is How to Conquer Your Anxiety and Lead a Productive Life. Please join me in welcoming Tony Hardman. Hi, Tony.
Hi, thank you so much for that warm intro. I appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be here and excited to talk about confidence and leadership and how to conquer things. That sounds great.
And I always start out with an easy question for you. Tell our audience, where do you call home? Where do you live?
So I live, most people would know it as Cleveland, Ohio, but it's actually like a suburb outside of Cleveland. But yeah, I'm a Midwesterner and I've been here for a good chunk of my life.
Yes, I think your team played my team last night.
Are you a Steelers fan?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's quite a rivalry we got going there. But
yes,
they've bested us for a long time.
Yeah,
so.
You beat us last night.
My best friend is from Pittsburgh, so there's a lot of love going around.
Yes, for sure. So tell me about your struggle with mental health.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story. I'll try to summarize it as best I can. I think it's important to preface the fact that I think there's two key factors that I wouldn't understand until later on in life. And number one, though I still have some contact with my biological father, he kind of, he wasn't around. I was 6 months old when he left my mom. And I didn't see him a lot growing up. He wasn't a big part of my life. So there was some, trauma with that and some abandonment issues. And also there's a family history of mental illness in my family. And for the most part, I was, from my memory, for the most part, happy-go-lucky kid. I had a pretty normal childhood. I had an adoptive father. He adopted me. My stepfather adopted me. I took his last name, and he raised me. And, my mom was in a loving relationship with him for a long time. But one of the problems was we moved around a lot. And so that was hard, always being the new kid in school. But around the time of fourth grade, I was living in Colorado and having a great school year. I had a lot of friends. I was really happy. And then we moved here to Ohio. And, this was back in 1994. So, times were very different then. It's not a global economy like it is now. We didn't have the internet the way that we have it now. So trends and stuff were different. So coming from Colorado, I was from a very urban environment, coming into a very, predominantly white environment, and just different culture, different things. And I was a new kid and it didn't go well. And I entered into a severe depression, and it was coming home from school, crying every day. I was miserable. And I remember it was probably around that time, or I think maybe around middle school, I said to my mom, I need to go to therapy. I need to see somebody and talk to somebody. And she took me to one appointment. I found it very helpful, but there's always been a stigma with mental health. There's still a stigma with mental health, but it was, imagine it today times 10 back then. A coworker had said to her, oh, he doesn't need therapy. Just take him to do something fun once a month. And my mom bought into that. And I never got to go back. I never got the help I needed.
Such a shame.
Yeah. So it wasn't that I never had friends. It wasn't that I never had a fun time and that I was always sad, but that numbness, that sadness kind of always stuck with me. And so as I got a little bit older and entered like early high school age, it got really bad to where I wanted to kill myself. And I remember one time I said to my father, I said, like, I want to kill myself. And, I was raised in an evangelical family, and he said, if you kill yourself, I won't go to your funeral because it's a sin.
Wow.
But, if you know anything about mental health, like these are cries for help. So, I had one, I didn't get the help I needed. This is a louder cry for help. I had another one where I was, in the basement with a friend and I had threatened to drink Tide, but this is just cries for help from somebody that's, suffering. So I continued to suffer from depression, and anxiety throughout high school. And like my nickname was Angry Tony, because if you know anything about anxiety and depression, in men especially, it often manifests itself in anger because you're frustrated with these feelings. You don't know what to do with them. And I didn't get the therapy or medication or anything I needed until I was finally an adult. I was going into college and I finally got on some antidepressants. And then when I got into college, I went to cognitive behavioral therapy on campus for some time. And that was helpful. The medication was and has been up until, about 5 years ago, a real challenge. I think anybody who's been on antidepressants can probably relate to. A lot of times it doesn't necessarily like take away the depression, but it numbs it. So you go from feeling down in a spiral to kind of feeling numb. So then, it wasn't, and again, going back, like I had good times in high school, like I had good friends. It's not always this like bad thing, but it's kind of that thing that's always there. And sometimes it gets really bad and you just don't want to be on this planet anymore. And that's a really tough thing. So throughout college, I didn't stick with therapy all the time. And I had, bouts of where I wasn't on medication and stuff. And that continued. And then in my early 20s, I was in the military for a long time. I got deployed. I got married, had a kid. And then there were times when I just like wasn't the husband and father that I wanted to be. And I was in and out of therapy all my life for a good chunk of time. And there was times where medication made things worse. And, I regret the things that I said to my wife or done in front of my kids, and like the anger, talking about the anger really being really bad. But finally, when I turned 30, and I'm 39 now, I was like, I really need to get this under control. So I called the VA and I went and I saw a psychiatrist. And then I want to make a point of this because one of the things I always talk about is persistence is really important. And I did not like him right off the bat. And you have to be your own advocate, especially when it comes to mental health. You have to find people that connect with you and that work with you. And so I knew that it wasn't going to work. So I said, look, this isn't going to work for me. I need to see somebody else. And luckily I got a new psychiatrist and they put me on a different type of medication that was actually a mood stabilizer, which made a world of difference for me. And then I went into like a more steady cognitive behavioral therapy progress, but I loved my therapist. And I went as far as I could with her. And I got a little bit better, but the anxiety, which was a huge part of my life, was still there. And there's a lot of other issues we could talk about, but after going through that process, eventually she made a recommendation and I went into a program that completely changed my life.
Whoa. So
I know it's a long story.
You talked about anxiety. Anxiety is a big thing. I know that personally from my family. And how do you make that it doesn't prevent you from living your life, being as productive, as happy, as doing what you want?
Absolutely. So it's a great question. And I didn't learn the answer to that until about 5 years ago. So the thing about cognitive therapy, it's great and it works for a lot of people, but a lot of the basis in it is designed around trying to rewire your thoughts. And the way I try to explain it is, let's say you're having a thought about something and the idea is, well, put a stop sign up in your mind to try to change that thought. Well, I could never change my negative thoughts. They just kept coming up. And I always had a ton of anxiety about like from the time that I was in like middle school, I always had this feeling that I would be homeless. I was just worried that I would never be able to make enough money to take care of myself, and I always thought that I would be homeless, and like had all this anxiety around my career. I later found out that was because of the abandonment issues from being a child. And it took me a lot of time to figure out that's why that was manifesting that way. But my cognitive behavioral therapist, she said, I really think you would benefit from something called acceptance and commitment therapy. And without going too far into it, it's also kind of a cognitive behavioral therapy. It kind of falls under that umbrella, but it's different. You're not trying to get rid of your negative thoughts. You learn how to accept them and kind of be flexible psychologically to adapt to whatever situation comes up. And there's 6 core principles in ACT, and we can talk about some of them later on. But to your question about how do you overcome the anxiety, the ACT part of that is really an amazing thing. And it worked so well for me. And it's this idea of taking committed action that is connected with core values. So let me kind of give an explanation of what that is. And this kind of is how you can kind of grow to become a confident entrepreneur. Or like, if you were like me, you had this idea and this desire to always do this thing, but you never had the confidence or ability to do it. So it's baby steps, and I'll be honest, it's baby steps, but it's like compound interest. It goes fast once you start doing it. So working through this program, it's like, okay, what is your core value? And there's different ways to identify that. And I actually have a tool that can help people do that. But one of the things is they'll ask you, think about your funeral. What do you want people to say about you? And my response immediately was, I want to be remembered as a good husband and father. So being a good husband and father was a very strong core value to me. So it's like, okay, now that you know your core value, and that you can have more than one, and there's, different areas of life. So you're going to have different values, but that's the one I latched onto. They're like, okay, now what committed action can you take towards that? So it started with small things, but one of the bigger ones was I signed my son up for soccer, and it's a rec league, and they were in dire need of coaches. Like, they were sending like multiple emails out, like, we really need a coach. Like, we can't start the season. And I'm like, man, like, I really want my son to play soccer, but I only played a little bit when I was a kid. Like, can I coach? Like, I don't know. But it was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to commit to do this because I love my kid and I want to be there for him. So I committed and I signed up to coach soccer. And I'll never forget, this was a few years ago, the day of my first practice, I was literally almost having a panic attack because I was so anxious. Maybe not quite that far, but it felt like almost if you're like standing high up on a ladder or like on top of a building and you're like looking down, and like kind of that feeling a little bit. And my wife was like almost like pissed at me because she's like, why are you doing this to yourself? Like, why would you agree to do this? And I said to her, because I have to, because it aligns so much with my core value that my desire to be a good father outweighed the anxiety that I was feeling at the time. And this is a process that I call brute forcing your anxiety. So if you've ever been in cybersecurity, brute force is where they crack a password really fast. It's like a hard way of cracking it. But this is, you brute force your anxiety, you connect to a value. So I did it. And then, the first practice, like, I got through it, and then I got through a couple more. And then I actually ended up being a really good coach. In
awesome.
fact, we didn't lose any games. We had one tie.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we had one tie. And now I'm in like my 5th season of coaching. But doing that little act, my confidence was just like grew tremendously. Like, things that I would never have thought to try in the past. Now I'm like, oh, okay, like, no big deal. Like, for example, I'm not a handy person. And to be fair, I haven't really taken on these projects, but I used to have a ton of anxiety about like home projects or whatever. I'm like, no, I'll try it. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? And like, in all areas of my life, a lot of that anxiety kind of like melted away. And that's not to say I don't still have anxiety. Like, there's still ways that there's a difference between conquering anxiety and easing anxiety. Those are two different things. And you have to use both. But that's how I got over it. And once I did that, I was like, I can start a podcast. Like, I can start a blog. I have the knowledge because I have, 15 years of digital marketing experience and stuff. I'm like, if these people can do it, I can do it. Yeah. So that's where that grew from.
Wow. And I will tell you that your son will be remembering the time that you spent with him.
I hope so. And again, part of that goes back to, I learned the way to not do things. And so I try, and I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Like, I could always be a better father, but I always have that in the back of my mind, trying to live up to that value. And I think that's another thing that's important to mention. I'm glad you brought that up, is that you can latch onto your values and they can be powerful enough to propel you forward, but hold them loosely. Like, you're not going to act in accordance with your values every single day of your life. It's kind of like a compass or a
Mm-hmm.
GPS, as
Yeah.
long as you're going
Yeah.
to the end, like that's your journey, that's your destination. And we can also kind of talk about goals too, and kind of the difference
Mm-hmm.
between goals and like your journey, because I think that's something that people get wrong as well.
Yeah.
Like I'll just say, so like with a goal, let's say that like your goal is, well, I want to run a marathon, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
you could train for that and you could do that. And like one of two things could happen. You could quit before it starts. One of a lot of things could happen. You could quit, you could injure yourself, you could give up, or you could actually achieve that goal. But then what happens when you achieve it? Well, it's like, oh, I want to run more marathons or I want to go further. And that's great. And that's a great thing to do. But what happens if you get in a car accident or something like that? When life derails you, it can really put you in a funk. And if you're so focused on goals and not values,
Yeah.
then it's really, really hard to adapt to that. Because if okay, my value is health and fitness, then, well, if you get in a car accident or something like that, you can find other ways to adapt to that problem. And it's not, oh my God, I can't run a marathon anymore. What am I going to do with my life? It's okay. Like I can't do this thing anymore, but I know my value is health and fitness. So how can I adapt?
Yeah. So good. You talked about this um, a little bit, you touched on it, but what exactly is the acceptance and commitment therapy? And how is it different than the cognitive behavioral therapy you talked about?
Yeah, so it's basically kind of that principle I talked about, where cognitive behavioral therapy is really about kind of rewiring your thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
changing the way that you think about patterns. And acceptance and commitment therapy is just that. So like there's 6 core processes, and I had them up because I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it's about psychological flexibility
Mm-hmm.
within those core processes. So like, for example, number one is like acceptance, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have to allow yourself to experience anxiety or
Yeah.
depression in a way where you allow it to be there and you're not trying to push it down. So think of it like a balloon or a ball that you're trying to hold underwater. And this is very
Yeah.
true with like people
Yeah.
that have trauma or like
Mm-hmm.
any sort of thing in your life. You can do that for a while, but in some way, shape, or form, it is going to surface. And if you keep
Mm-hmm.
trying to hold on like that, it's probably not going to surface in a way that you want it to. Exactly. Exactly. So number one is like, okay, like accept these feelings, but without connecting to them. And that's kind of
Right.
number two, which is cognitive diffusion. So like when you're accepting it, it's like, okay, I notice these feelings are showing up for me without saying
Mm-hmm.
like I feel whatever. It's I notice the feeling of depression. I notice the feeling of sadness. And this is like the cognitive diffusion part. So like let's talk about anxious thoughts in that result. And this is kind of the second core process. Let's say you're having the thought like I'm not smart enough to be an entrepreneur, right? Um, you're telling yourself these negative things
Mm-hmm.
constantly. Well, you can try to flip that, and you can say, instead of I'm not good enough, it's I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. So
Oh,
like it's a little bit different. It's a subtle distinction, but sometimes that can be enough of a separation.
mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of different techniques within this. So like humor is one of them. So like let's just say you're having the thought like, man, I'm just a loser. Like I'm just a loser. I don't know. Well, a couple things you can do is like you can say it in a funny voice. So like Cookie Monster, like, oh, I'm a loser. When it
Mm-hmm.
takes power away from you, it's kind of like if you've ever seen or read Harry Potter,
Yes.
a Bogart, where you turn it into something, your biggest fear, you turn it into something funny. And I know it sounds silly, but I'm telling you, like
It
it
works.
works. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's tremendous. It really works. Or like these things that you ruminate on, like if you're constantly telling yourself you're not good enough or you're never going to be successful, but say that's like something you're always telling yourself, well, label it. That's like tell your brain, like, oh, that's the I'm not good enough story. So when you put those two things together, acceptance, oh, my brain is telling me it's the I'm not good enough story again. And it's like, thank you, brain. I know you're trying to protect me, because that's what anxiety
Bye-bye.
does. Yeah, that's what anxiety does, right? You're trying to
Yeah.
protect, it's trying to protect you. That's your primitive brain. But I'm good. That's just the I'm not good enough story. And I'm going to let it go. And then, like,
Yeah.
as far as like letting it go, like, there's other techniques too. Like, imagine a negative thought as a leaf on a stream. Like, put the thought on a leaf and let it flow by. Or, like, for me,
Nice.
I try to imagine it as like an annoying pop-up ad, like on a website. Like, just click out of it. You don't always have to engage with these things. You don't have to get rid of them. You just acknowledge it. Like, I see you. but I'm going to move on with
Mhm.
my day or with whatever
Right.
you're doing. And it's not that you should ignore these things, like take time, sit down, like let it be. And then there's another principle that's called like self as context. So it's a little bit of that cognitive diffusion thing, but it's kind of this idea of like your self as observer. And the most simplest way that I can explain that is if you've ever played or seen someone play a video game, they're controlling a character and like you can see that character being controlled. The character is not controlling them. Well,
Right.
imagine like your mind is like that. So like your mind is kind of like a haywire GPS, and sometimes you have four signals going off at the same time, and you have to be like, no, 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 like take a step back. I'm in control here. Like I'm
Mm.
not going to go right because there's no road right. So I'm going to keep going straight, even though, you're in
Your
that
brain's,
GPS model,
yes, right,
your
right.
brain's telling you to go that way. So that's it. And then there's the values and committed action portion of it. And I might be forgetting one, but like that's kind of the idea. And so like whenever different things crop up, you can respond to it differently. Oh, the one I forgot was, in a really important one, is connection to the present. So a
Oh,
lot of people think of
yeah.
this. A lot of people think of this in terms of mindfulness, but like with ACT, they don't use the word mindfulness a lot because people can get caught up in what that means. But it's really simply just like learning to live in the present, and that was a huge change in my life. To like that's what really taught me to like enjoy life. And if you want, I could tell a quick little story about
Yeah,
like
go
how I
ahead.
did that. Yeah. So like similar to the exercise with soccer, like with the committed action,
Hmm.
it was okay, like I want you to learn how to be connect to the present. So let's try some mindfulness activities without meditation first. And one of them was this idea of noticing. So it's like going about your day and noticing like little moments of joy, little things that happen. And these don't have to be anything profound. Like it can be a great cup of coffee,
Hmm.
kiss from a loved one in the morning, hug from a kid, whatever. It could be like a compliment from a stranger. It doesn't matter. It's just these little things.
A gorgeous blue sky.
Yeah, yeah, great. I love that one. I'm gonna
Hmm.
use that in the future. That's a
Yeah,
great
for
one.
sure.
Yeah. And it's just kind of like, noticing these things. And so when I did that, it was Christmas time and we were at like a family function and like somebody dressed up as Santa and came, and my son was little at the time. And like he sat on Santa's lap and so did my girls. And I just remember being in that moment and just like savoring it and enjoying it. And I was like,
Hmm.
wow, this is so, so powerful. And again, it's going back to what I was saying before, that compounding effect. It's like once you see the power of some of these things, it can open up a whole new world. And so like I grew
Hmm.
from there and did different mindfulness stuff. And now like, I meditate every day. Like that's an important thing. And then especially like in the business world, like, listen, everybody's been in a conversation that hasn't gone their way, or, something
For
changes. Like
sure.
if you can step away, like once you build that muscle up, that ability to connect
Hmm.
to the present, if you can step away for 2 minutes and do like just a 2-minute meditation, you can quickly calm down, be present, and like navigate without all of the like headiness of these intense
Yes.
emotions. So
Hmm.
these are like really, really powerful tools that you can build in like what I call a psychological flexibility toolkit by starting out small throughout these different core, well, I guess they call them core processes, but that's what they are.
Yeah. So how can people ease their anxiety and depression um, in, as you said, it comes up in everyday lives. It is that unexpected, but it's, I guess, expectation that something could drop any minute. How do we ease that depression?
Yeah. So to get to being able to do that, it does take practice in like some of these principles that we've already talked
Hmm.
about. Like you'll get better with it over time. And there's different techniques you can do. Like you can do some of the things that we talked about with like reframing your thoughts. That's the whatever story or whatever. But another really good one is this principle called dropping anchor. And that's essentially just like connecting to the present moment. And I do this a lot if I'm
Hmm.
overwhelmed by something. Like most people, I think like change can be overwhelming. If there's a lot of changes that are coming and you're not super comfortable with them, or something is particularly overwhelming for you, I'll drop anchor in a couple of different ways. So like one way is just stop what you're doing, find a quiet space, whatever, could be whatever room you're in, and take a couple minutes and just notice what's going on around you. So maybe like notice 5 things in the room, and then try to notice all the different sounds in the room. And what you're doing it by that process, I know it sounds like this will never work, right? But what it does is it grounds you in that moment. So instead of like, because anxiety, it's just like runaway thoughts. It's like going crazy. Your brain's going haywire. It's like when you're trying to fall asleep and your brain won't shut up. It's the same kind of thing when you're overwhelmed, but probably magnified by 10. Well, the first thing you got to do to calm those emotions is you got to ground yourself in the present moment. So like, that's the first thing. If you develop, a mindfulness practice, it could be taking a mindful walk. It could be, a 5-minute meditation, 10-minute meditation, whatever it is, like grounding yourself is number one. Number two is like we talked about, it's that acceptance portion of it. It's noticing, how is this showing up in my body? I notice my chest is tense. I notice my muscles are tense. I notice I'm breathing faster. I notice sadness or whatever. So it's labeling these things without connecting to them, saying, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm tense. It's just kind of taking a mental note of those things. And then again, doing that cognitive diffusion piece of it, which is like not connecting to these thoughts and things. But like I said, it's not an instant thing. It takes practice, but it's very, very effective to do it. And it's not like you're not going to get rid of anxiety. Honestly, I've never met anybody that can get rid of anxiety, but that's why it's called, like, you can ease it. Like, you can disconnect from it a little bit. You can kind of be more, maybe rational is not the right word, but you're not so tangled up in it. And it's not like, have you ever seen the movie Soul? It's a Disney movie. And
it's
like
an awesome movie.
Yeah, I'm telling you, Pixar, they're all act therapy people, because so many of their movies have this in it. But towards the end of the movie, the main character, she's like clouded by like these dark emotions and things going over. So when you ground yourself and you do this like cognitive diffusion and like these mindfulness things, it kind of lets that float away a little bit. And then you're able to think a little bit more calmly, a little bit more, cleanly. And you can then figure out, okay, well, what do I want to do with this based on my values? Like, you can connect to values and make decisions and action in your life. And that's kind of like the long and short of it all.
Wow. It is. This time has flown by, and gosh, so much more that we could talk about. It's been great. It's time, though, for a rapid fire.
Okay. Now I'm nervous. There goes the anxiety.
No need to be nervous. So talk to us about burnout first aid. Burnout first aid. What is that, and how does it work?
So burnout first aid is a concept that I kind of stumbled upon when I was backpacking. Before I went backpacking for the first time, a couple of weeks before, I went on vacation to a beach with my family. And after that week of vacation, I was still burnt out. Like, I was still stressed out. I didn't get what I need. And I think a lot of people can relate to this. Like, you go on vacation and you come back, but you're still just like, it wasn't enough. But then I went backpacking for literally, it was like 2 nights in the Allegheny National Forest with my brother. And when you go backpacking, you have absolutely no, well, depending on where you go, you have no cell service.
Yes,
so like, I had no cell service. And the funny thing about it was, like, the one day it was literally pouring down, like, I'm talking like torrential downpour all day, but I was in the best mood ever, because all I had to do was focus on moving forward and staying alive and eating and sleeping. And like, that's kind of like the core of what being a human is. Like, those are kind of your core like needs. And after that weekend, we finally were like coming back into a cell service zone, and my phone just like was going ding, 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 ding. And I was like, oh my God, is that what I'm dealing with all the time? No wonder I'm so burnt out. And so I wrote a blog post about it, and I kind of came up with a way to kind of replicate that in your own life. Like, if you're into outdoors and nature, go do that, like, and get out of a cell phone zone. But if you're not, I would say at the very least, set aside a weekend where, number one, turn your phone off. Most people can't do it. Get a lockbox and put your phone in a box. And before you do it, have a backup way to contact emergency services if something happens. Nothing probably will, but just for safety's sake. But, get a box that locks, that you can't open, and it has a timer on it. So put your phone away. Plan out some activities that are kind of going to be calming and mindful. So like, I would say, like, disconnect your internet, disconnect your phone, let work or whoever you need to know, like, hey, like, I am going to be off the grid this weekend. You will not be able to get a hold of me. And then plan activities that are like enriching. So like, go for a walk, get a little bit of exercise, play some board games with some loved ones. I say, like, even you can play a video game, just make sure it's not like Call of Duty, play like Animal Crossing or something like that. You can even watch a movie if you pick one that's like appropriate for what you're trying to do. So something like Inside Out or Soul, or there's this amazing movie called About Time. That's great. But once that's done, turn your internet back off. And you can even have like a friend or a loved one with you, but make them follow the rules. They don't have to lock their phone up, but put it in another room. And I'm telling you, I know it sounds hard, but if you do this for 2 or 3 days, you will feel immense relief from the burnout. But I call it first aid because I have to be honest, it's not going to go away. If you're in a situation with work or whatever that's causing you burnout and that situation does not change, those feelings are going to increase again. But it is a reprieve from that. It's a breath of fresh air.
For me, it was to go to the beach in October when there was
that sounds nice.
no folks there, and by myself, not with my husband or anybody. It was just for that, to regroup. But I also cruises help because I'm too cheap to pay for the internet there. So for 5-7 days, I'm not connected with anything.
The thing about a cruise that I think might be problematic though is other people can be a negative factor at times.
Yeah. Well,
so you never know who you're going to get there.
If you don't know anyone, that's helpful. And I like to do the excursions because, again, you get to push yourself out into, like I like to just swim with dolphins and things like that.
That sounds amazing. Yeah. Any of those types of activities where you can kind of just connect to the present, connect with nature, even like renting an Airbnb or a cabin, like in a no cell phone service area would be tremendous for your mental health.
So talk to us about what is your bucket list now? You've done so many things.
That's such a good question. So the one thing on my bucket list I'll probably never do because my wife is like, you're not leaving for 6 months. But one of my core values, another core value is adventure. And I love hiking and backpacking. So I would love to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail.
Oh, nice.
6 months to do it. It's probably not going to happen. I may probably end up like doing like the John Muir Trail. That's only like 30 days or doing like a week or two here or there. But I would say like probably more realistically would be eventually I would like to do a remote work RV around for a year or two, like adventure type thing. I think a lot of times like we think about, oh, when I retire, I can do all these things. And like, I'm only 39, but it's like, I don't want to wait until I'm 57, 60 years old to do those things. Like I don't know if I'm going to make it that far. You never know what could happen, so like, I want to do those things. But yeah, I think like more importantly to me is like that core value of adventure. And like, as long as I'm living up to that, then I think then I'll find joy in my life. And that's kind of the more important thing to me.
I will suggest to you that you do that RV trip now. My father worked for the post office and he took off 2 weeks usually, but for one summer we took 4 weeks off from took 4 weeks off from work, and we went from Pittsburgh to California and back to go in the southern part of the US and the northern part of the US. And it's a trip as a kid that I'll never forget. The good, the bad, the ugly, everything.
Yeah.
But it was just a time where you just got to appreciate where we live and this country and things that you just don't see in your hometown. And absolutely. So I would recommend that. Your kids will love you for it, and we're about to buy one. We're going to start taking more like weekend type things, and then we might take a little bit longer over the summer. My wife is not a remote worker, so it's a little bit more challenging, but we did talk about, my oldest is 15 years old, and when she goes off, we might do like a year in the RV, which would be great. But I want to touch on something you said that I thought was so great. You said the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think like that's an important thing to remember, right? Is like, no matter what you're doing, whether it's a vacation or an RV trip or whatever, not everything is going to be perfect all the time. Like things are going to be bad. And I think that's where I go back to this idea of like noticing, or, probably easier to call it gratitude. Like, if every day, like, and I do this with my kids sometimes, I'll say like, what was the best part of your day? And the funny thing is, if you're having can I swear? Yeah, you can.
If you're having a shitty day and you're like, what was the best part of my day? And you're forced to think about that. You're like, it could be like, oh, well, like, I didn't hit any red lights on the way into work today or whatever, like, It's this tiny little thing, but it forces you to think about something positive, because life is not always going to be perfect. You're not always going to be happy, because like happiness is an emotion like any other, and it's part of the beautiful tapestry of life. So when you learn to connect with the present and have gratitude and all these things, those are the things, the human experience that makes up a joyous life.
Yeah. I think that's why, either having your phone, the last thing you look at on your phone, or the first thing is an affirmation of that that you are achieving this and your goals and whatnot. But
Yeah,
also having a gratitude journal where, even if it's, on your phone in your notebook or something, but just to force yourself every day to build that habit of being thoughtful, to say, that you start to notice, because you want to put something in there that was great. And so all of a sudden, the little things, just as you said, are something to be grateful for.
Yeah, and there's like all these little different techniques that you could do. Like, some people like journaling. Like I wrote a post about how to create a routine for mental health. And it's like, there's something out there for everyone. I don't really journal a lot because it feels like homework to me, but I definitely see the value of it. So I do other things, like I'll do like the grateful 5. So I'll be like, okay, time for a grateful 5. And I'll just name 5 things that I'm grateful for. And you build that into your routine, and then it becomes second nature. And like when you do these little things, they compound and they get better. And if you make it a part of your daily life, then you become much more resilient to everything that life's going to throw at you.
One of my mentors is Darren Hardy, and he gives a 5 to 6 minute daily video that he emails to us. And it's always positive. It's always guidance, but it's only 5 minutes. And I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we have all these great things and we want to have some big event and whatnot. And it's like, but all you need to do is record it and share it with your audience. 5 minutes, 5 minutes of your day.
Yeah. Little things do add up for sure. Yeah. The entrepreneurship thing, like that portion is like interesting, because even if you're not somebody that deals with mental illness or like has regular or, like a lot of anxiety, those things are going to come up throughout your journey. And like, I'm not some hugely successful entrepreneur. Like I'm still very much like in a lot of the beginning stages of it, but I'm not like a baby beginner. The story I told about soccer, like that's what opened up the confidence to be able to go and say like, what, I've had this idea for so long. I want to do this and put this thing in the world. And like, that was a huge hurdle to get over that. And then it compounds. Then you go into like, you'll have times where you doubt yourself. So like I said, like I have many years of marketing experience, and it's like I know this stuff, but I'm still trying to learn every day. And it's like you're like, okay, I know the way to do this is slow and steady, but I've been doing this for 8 months now. Why am I not making a bunch of money? Like, what is the shortcut? Even though I know there's no shortcut, right?
That's
or
right.
you second guess yourself. So like I think building these ideas of gratitude and grounding yourself in the present, and not, especially as an entrepreneur, if you're so focused on like the present, that's why so many people give up within the first year. And usually, like everybody that I've talked to that's been very successful, at least in like with like content, it takes 2 or 3 years before and they'll show you like this curve, like of like a metric, for example, like it'll be like year 1, year 2, and it's like a flat line. And then suddenly year 3, it's like, boom, it goes up. But it's like, I'm glad I didn't quit here, like at this one part. And so many people don't make it past that. And I think like if you can learn this psychological flexibility and resiliency, then it can help catapult you like past those things. And the one thing that I'll say too is another quick story. I'll make this one really quick. I like to look at other people and be like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And I first learned that when I joined the Army. I was 17 years old. I joined the Army Reserve, and I was going to my unit like before I went off to boot camp. And like, like any population, you have people that are squared away and people that are not. And I was anxious about going to boot camp. And like one of the like senior people was like, don't even worry about it. Look at Private Snuffy. And that's not their name, but look at them. Like if they can go through it, you can do it. And I'm like, I look at him, I'm like, yeah, if they can do it, I can go through it or whatever. So like, if you think about some of the people that in your life and they're like, well, they did it or whatever, I'm, not to be like braggy or whatever. I think a lot of people that have high intelligence are very, what's the word? Not boastful about it. They're humble. I try to be humble about it, but I'm like, if they can do it, like I'm smart enough to do it. And that's kind of another way to kind of think about how to get past that sort of thing. And it takes all these things working in conjunction to really get that train moving and start working towards success.
And I like to interview people that have anxiety and depression and things like that they've overcome, because as entrepreneurs, especially women entrepreneurs, we have all these imposter syndrome feelings, and for so long we always were behind, second guessing everything that we did.
Yeah.
And so I like for the tools and the tips that you have learned to be there. Anyone can apply these. As you said,
Absolutely.
Everyone faces anxiety. Everyone faces these challenges. It's just maybe at a different degree, but the tools that you share help any degree.
Yeah, I think they are. Yeah, they're helpful. And I would say, like, hopefully you have somebody in your life that's a good friend that can be a cheerleader.
Yeah.
And if you don't, I mean, like, even if you do, I'll never forget something that my sister-in-law said to me one day when I was being particularly negative about myself. And she looked at me dead on and she said, "Be nice to my friend Tony." And that really sunk in with me. I was like, oh my God, like, I wouldn't talk to anybody else like that.
Yeah.
Why am I so hard on myself? So like, loving kindness goes really, really far. And like, to your point about, women's struggles, like, my wife is like such the story of success. I am so in awe of this woman. She gave up everything to stay home with our kids for so many years. And then I got laid off once, and without even being prompted, she got a job like at Target of all places. And she's like, well, I'm going to bring in some money or whatever. Like, you're laid off. You can like help with the kids and cook and stuff. And I had to learn how to cook and help with the kids. And but the thing about my wife is she is so tenacious. It doesn't matter what she's doing. She gives it 110%. So she was practically running that place by the time she left. And she was so good at it that one of her regulars offered her a job at like a senior living place as a receptionist. And within a year, she was the director of sales at that place, doing phenomenal. And then like she had gotten laid off there, and that was a huge hit to her confidence, because you have to understand,
for sure,
she built that up, and she got hit with this like shock of like, oh, well, maybe this won't happen again, because she doesn't have a degree. And she was doubting herself. And I was like, no, like, you've got this, you've got the skill. And there was a job, and it said like requires 5 years experience, and she only had like 2 or whatever. And I was like, no, you should apply for that job. And she's like, no, they'll never do it. And I'm like, no, apply for that job. And she did. And within 30 minutes, they called her, and then they hired her. And long story short, she's a badass bee now. And she's like the most confident woman and makes more money than me. And I'm so proud of her. And it's just a testament to like what a little bit can do. And if you latch onto that and you stay vigilant with like your mental health routine and all these things, like, you can go so far in this life.
Absolutely. Well, it is time for me to warn everyone that's just listening to grab a pencil and paper. I'm going to share my screen, and I will tell you what the website is where you can get in touch with Tony. So he is at notquitezen.co. notquitezen.co. He's on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Just look up Not Quite Zen, or also just search from his name. You'll most likely be able to find him as well. And I'm going to let him talk to you about what he has on his website.
Yeah, you can just Google Not Quite Zen, or if you want the podcast, you can really search for that anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just search for Not Quite Zen. And I would say, like, the big thing is I do a newsletter once a week. And it's not just content from me. It's like mental health content from around the web, and also like positive news stories, because there's so much negative going on that you like need a jolt of positive. So I would say, like, go to my website. It's right there when you like log in, right there, put in your email. I think I only ask for email. I don't even know if I ask for your name. Maybe I do, but anyway, you'll get the newsletter once a week, and it'll tell you anytime there's a new podcast or news post for me. But it's really just kind of a roundup of this mental health stuff. And, I've got some things planned for the future. I am going to start doing probably either, an online course with the group coaching component to this ACT therapy thing. But really, even if that's not for you, I share other resources that are free. And I go over these principles all the time on my podcast and in my blog.
Awesome. So when you get to that course already, let me know. I'll be back on and we can talk about it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being such a great guest. You shared so many important things that I think the audience will really be able to benefit from. And it's great hearing your stories. And And I appreciate your being vulnerable to telling us those things about you, because it really helps people connect and be able to see themselves in your story. And that's where the difference happens. So great job.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's why I do it. And also like just from a perspective of like a budding entrepreneur, I would say like community is so important.
Yeah.
So if you're a newbie entrepreneur, or even if you've been doing it for a long time, like reach out to me, send me an email. Like I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to be a part of the community, because like the more we lean on each other and learn from each other, like the stronger that we'll be and we'll grow.
So true. So as I tell everyone, until next time, please remember life is a journey, and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Nettling signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Nettling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.